Alright, so you know how life just loves to throw curveballs. Yeah, well, I got beamed with a freaking fastball last night. For years, I've been Mr. Day Shift at this little supermarket. Fresh foods. Nothing fancy, just your regular, kinda boring grocery store. My gig was simple: clock in at 9 in the morning. Deal with the usual crowd of shoppers, you know, the early birds. The lunch rush, the after-work folks, and then peace out by 6 p.m. Easy peasy, predictable as sunrise. But last night, dude, everything went sideways. It was around 8 at night when my phone buzzed. Caller ID said, Sarah Fresh Foods. Sarah's my manager, and honestly, she's a gem. Sweet lady. Always understanding if you needed a day off, or if the schedule needed some jiggling. So when she called, and I heard this urgency in her voice, I knew something wasn't right. Alex. Her voice was kinda crackly, like she was on a bad cell connection, but I could hear the stress. Hey, it's Sarah. Listen, I need you to do me a massive favor tonight. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, fork halfway to my leftover spaghetti. Sure, Sarah, what's up? It's about Mark. Mark's the night shift guy. Keeps to himself, kinda quiet, but always seemed reliable enough. He's not answering his phone, and nobody saw him leave this morning. I frowned, spaghetti forgotten. Mark, maybe he's just sleeping in. Forgot to charge his phone. That seemed like the most likely thing. Sarah sighed, and it sounded heavy, like she was carrying a ton of bricks. I wish it was that simple, Alex. I checked the cameras. I was starting to get a weird feeling in my stomach. What about the cameras? Alex. She said, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. It didn't leave the store. My heart did a little skip. Wait, what do you mean he didn't leave? Like at all? I mean, she continued, voice shaky now. He was there at 6 a.m. when the morning crew came in. But then nothing. He's just gone. Vanished. Like in poof, gone. This was getting seriously weird. So you need me to cover for him tonight? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Just tonight. She said quickly, like she was reading my mind. Just this once. I know it's last minute, but you're the only one who's free. Please, Alex. I'll owe you big time. There was something in her voice, a kind of desperate plea. That made me uneasy. But Sarah had always been good to me. Couldn't leave her hanging. All right, I'll do it, I said, maybe a little too quickly. But just this once, okay. Sarah let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for hours. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. Be there by 10:30 p.m., okay? Yeah. I'll be there. You're a lifesaver. And then she hung up. By 10:30 p.m., I was pulling into the Fresh Foods parking lot, trying to mentally pep talk myself into a long, boring night. The store is on the edge of town, in this sleepy suburban neighborhood. It's the kind of place where excitement goes to die, especially at night. I figured I'd be completely alone for most of my shift. Bring on the boredom, right? As I walked towards the back entrance, I noticed something off. The employee door, which was always locked at night, was wide open. A gust of wind was catching it, making it swing back and forth with this creepy creaking noise. And then I saw him, Mark. He was just inside the doorway, shivering like crazy, like he was caught in a blizzard. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and man, they were filled with something I couldn't place. Terror. Pure unadulterated terror. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, face all pale and gaunt. Mark. I called out, more confused than worried at that point. Dude, what the hell are you doing out here? Sarah's been looking all over for you. Mark didn't answer right away. He just stumbled towards me, steps all wobbly. When he got close enough, I could see sweat beading on his forehead. Even though it was a cool night. Alex, he rasped, voice barely a whisper, like his throat was full of sand. Don't cover the night shift. I blinked, totally taken aback. What? What are you talking about? You don't understand. He muttered, running a shaky hand through his messed up hair. This place of it's not what it seems. You don't want to be here at night. Trust me. I couldn't help but feel a little irritated. Mark had always been a bit of an oddball, but this was just too much. Come on, man, you're freaking out. Maybe you just need a few days off. He grabbed my arm, and his grip was surprisingly strong for someone who looked like he could barely stand. No, I'm serious. Don't stay. I just stared at him, completely puzzled. Then he kept going. But if you do stay, check the last drawer of the counter. There's something there that will help you. And for God's sake, leave at 6 a.m. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Mark, listen to me. I started, trying to get through to him. I'm not going back in there," he cut me off, shaking his head so violently I thought he might hurt himself. "Not ever." And then before I could say another word, Mark just bolted, sprinted off into the darkness like demons were chasing him. I stood there for a few minutes, watching him disappear into the night. His behavior was totally bizarre, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. Night shifts mess with people, right? Still, something about his warning, the sheer terror in his eyes, it kinda gnawed at the back of my mind. When I finally stepped inside the store, I saw the day shift clerk, a girl named Lisa, getting ready to leave. She gave me this tired smile, but I could see the relief all over her face. She was more than ready to clock out. "Hey, Alex." She yawned, stretching. "Thanks for covering tonight." "No problem," I replied, glancing around. "Hey, did you see Mark earlier? He was acting kinda strange." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Mark?" "No, I didn't see him." I frowned. "What do you mean? He was just outside, like a minute ago." Freaking out about something. She shook her head, clearly confused. "I didn't see anyone. And I've been here the whole time." A chill ran down my spine, just a little one, but it was there. I forced myself to shrug it off. Weird. Maybe he was hiding out somewhere. Maybe. Lisa said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Well, good luck tonight. It's usually dead quiet." But then she hesitated, biting her lip, like she wanted to say more. "But," I prompted. "Nothing," she said quickly, grabbing her coat. "Just don't let it get to you. See you tomorrow." And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet, fluorescent, lit store. The first few minutes were totally uneventful. Couple of stragglers wandered in, grabbing late night snacks or stuff they forgot to pick up earlier. I scanned their stuff, made the usual small talk, find everything okay, paper or plastic, and started to think maybe this night shift thing wouldn't be so bad after all. Easy money for a quiet night, right? Around 11:30 p.m. though, the store just died. Fell completely silent. No more customers, no cars going by outside. Nothing but me and the low hum of the refrigerators. It was quiet, like, too quiet. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe I'd just spend the night catching up on podcasts or something. Then, as I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone, I noticed something odd. At the far end of the store, in the dimly lit aisles, there was a figure. Looked like a customer, maybe, but they weren't moving, just standing there smack dab between two easels, like they were waiting for something. "Hello," I called out, squinting into the darkened easels. No response. The figure stayed perfectly still. It was way down at the end of the store, where the lights are always kinda dim, casting these long, creepy shadows between the shelves. I squinted harder, trying to make out any details, but it was tough. Couldn't tell if it was a dude, a lady, or just my eyes playing tricks on me. The store was dead silent except for the faint hum of the fridges and the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Hello," I called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. The figure didn't budge. It was unsettling, I'm not gonna lie. But I told myself it was probably just some customer lingering in the shadows, maybe trying to decide between, like, two different kinds of chips or something. Yeah, that had to be it. I turned my attention to the security monitors, thinking I could get a better look at whoever it was. We've got cameras all over the place. Oddly enough, though, the camera that had a direct view of that aisle showed nothing. Just empty aisles, shelves stacked with products, but no person. Huh. I frowned, glancing back up towards the aisle itself, and my heart did another one of those little skips. The figure had moved. It was closer now, just beyond the really dim section, but still standing unnaturally still. My eyes flicked back to the monitor. Still nothing. The figure wasn't there on the screen. Didn't make sense. Cameras don't just lie. Right. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off this weird feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Or maybe they were standing in a blind spot of the camera. Yeah, that had to be it. But when I looked back towards the aisle again, the figure had moved again. This time, much closer. Now it was standing under better lighting, but somehow, the shadows still seemed to cling to it. I still couldn't make out a face, just this vague silhouette of a person. They stood there, unnervingly still, like a statue, just waiting. Before I could even think about it, my body moved on its own. I got up from behind the counter and started walking towards the aisle. Dumb idea, probably, but I just had to see. As soon as I rounded the corner and stepped into the aisle, nothing. No one was there. I stood still for a moment, listening. The hair on the back of my neck was prickling. The store was empty. Complete was no one there. But me. I checked every easel, walking through them slowly, trying to find any sign of someone having been there. But nope, nada, nobody. Eventually, I just went back to the counter, telling myself that whoever it was must have juffed quietly. Sneakily, I checked the cameras again. All clear. No sign of movement. And then I remembered what Mark had said. Check the last drawer of the counter. The drawer. Right. I hesitated. Looked at the monitor again. Midnight had just ticked over. The store felt even quieter now, if that was even possible. The silence was pressing in on me, like the air itself was getting thicker. Reluctantly, I reached down and opened the last drawer behind the counter. Expecting, I don't know, maybe some extra price tags or something. Instead, my fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out, unfolded it, and read the first few lines. These are the rules that you need to follow to make it through the night shift. I found out about them the hard way, so I've written them down to keep the new night shift clerk safe. If you encounter a strange event, please note it down. I rolled my eyes. Seriously. Rules. This had to be some elaborate prank by Mark, or maybe one of the other guys. Still, a part of me, a stupid, scared part of me, couldn't shake off how freaked out Mark had been. His voice. His eyes had echoed in my head. I kept reading. Rule 1. Occasionally, you'll see a shadowy figure at the far end of the store, just standing between two easels. It will not move unless you ignore it. Always nod or wave to acknowledge its presence, and it will leave you alone. A sudden rush of panic hit me. That figure had that been it. Was that what Mark was talking about? Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, shouting into the empty store. Yeah, real funny guys, really mature. My voice echoed back at me from the easels, but the store just stayed silent. Waiting, I kept reading, my hand starting to shake a little. Rule 2. From 2 a.m. onwards, aisle 7 becomes different. Products are rearranged, the air is colder, and you will start to see strange things that aren't there. Sure, I muttered, rolling my eyes again, but this time, it felt forced. This had to be some weird initiation prank for covering the night shift. Still, a strange uneasiness settled in my bones as I read on. Rule 3. Between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. Only 5 customers can enter the store. After the 5th one, any further customers are not human, no matter how they appear. Count them carefully. And if a 6th enters, lock yourself in the back office, and do not leave until you're sure they've gone. My eyes widened. Not human. What kind of crap was this? But the way it was written, so matter of fact, it was starting to creep me out. I forced myself to keep going. Rule 4. No matter what happens, aisle 3 must be cleaned at exactly 2:45 a.m. every night. A spill will appear on the floor out of nowhere, and you must clean it up as soon as you see it. Ignoring it will cause the spill to spread, and soon you'll notice wet footprints appearing around the store. Footprints? Seriously? I chuckled nervously. This was getting ridiculous. Rule 5. If the back door is left unlocked, someone or something will enter after midnight. You won't notice them, but you will feel an unsettling chill, as if someone is standing right behind you. I instinctively glanced behind me at the back door. Crap. I had left it unlocked. Just figured, we never lock it during the day, so why bother at night? Stupid. The next rule sent another wave of dread through me. Rule 6. Occasionally, you might catch a glimpse of yourself walking the easels, stocking shelves, or mopping the floors. Whatever you do, do not approach them, and do not let them see you. A sense of unease started growing in the pit of my stomach. I tried laughing it off, telling myself it was all BS, but the truth was, this list was starting to get to me. My fingers were actually trembling now as I read the last rule. Rule 7. If you hear sobbing or cries for help from the manager's office, do not go inside. The door may be ajar. The crying will get louder the closer you get, and if you open the door, it will stop. But something else will be waiting in the silence. I couldn't read anymore. I threw the list back in the drawer, like I could somehow forget about it by just not looking at it. That's when something in the corner of my eye made me freeze. A shadow flickered across the security monitor near the back door. Back door, Rule 5. Unlocked. I had to make sure no one had come in. Even if it was just my imagination running wild, I had to check. I hurried towards the back door, half expecting to find one of my coworkers sneaking around, trying to scare me. But when I reached the door, no one was there. The air felt unnaturally cold, and a draft blew in through the still open back door, making the hair on my arm stand up. I slammed the door shut, feeling a shiver crawl up my neck. Locked it this time, double-checked it. Just as I turned around, there was a faint knock on the door. Knock, knock. Cold sweat broke out on my skin. Slowly, like in a horror movie when you know you shouldn't, I turned back towards the door. Another knock. Faint, but definitely there. I opened it, expecting I don't even know what I was expecting. Maybe Lisa had come back to mess with me. Maybe Mark was playing some kind of twisted joke. But there was no one there. The back alley was empty. Streetlights flickered down the block, casting long shadows, but nothing else. Not a soul. I stepped outside, glanced around. Nothing, just empty night. I shut the door, locked it again, triple-checked it this time. As I walked back to the counter, my heart skipped a beat. I felt it again, that cold, icy presence behind me. So real I could almost feel the breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, ready to yell, ready to fight, ready to something. But nothing, just the wall, empty asle behind me, fluorescent lights buzzing. Silence. I stood there breathing heavily. Rule 5. You will feel an unsettling chill, as if someone is standing right behind you. I could feel something watching me. I knew it. I had to get a grip on myself. Shake off this creeping dread that felt like it was crawling under my skin. Standing frozen behind the counter definitely wasn't helping. These rules, they were unsettling, sure. But that's all they were, right? Words on paper. A stupid prank. I needed to move around, clear my head, remind myself this was just a quiet, empty store. I decided to do a quick walk through the aisles. Maybe even restock a few items, just to keep busy. Familiar routine, that's what I needed. Something to ground me, keep me from spiraling further into this paranoia. As I walked the aisles, everything seemed normal. At first. Familiar rows of snacks, canned goods, drinks, all stacked neatly in their places. But as I made my way towards the freezers at the back of the store, something caught my eye. An ice cream carton, lying on the floor, right in front of the freezer doors. Still sealed, perfectly intact, but just sitting there, like someone had dropped it. I frowned. No one had been in this section recently. The few customers I'd had earlier hadn't even gone near the freezers. I bent down to pick it up, muttering to myself that it was probably just Lisa messing with me before she left. Just a stupid prank. I stood up with the carton in hand, and as I reached out to open the freezer door, something cold and solid wrapped around my wrist. Instantly I froze. The sensation was real. Ice cold, like fingers made of ice. Yet, there was nothing visible holding me. I yanked my hand back, pulling it towards my chest, stumbling backwards. My eyes darted around the freezer aisle. Empty. No one there. But I had felt it. Something had grabbed me. I stared at my hand, my skin tingling where the grip had been. Thin red marks were tracing the outline of where those fingers had been. They were narrow, and there were only 3 distinct markings. Like the hand that had grabbed me had only 3 fingers. What the hell? I whispered, voice shaky. But my voice sounded small, almost drowned out by the eerie silence of the store. I practically ran back to the counter, my hand still throbbing with that icy touch. The thin red lines on my wrist were still there, burning slightly. Like whatever had touched me had left a mark deeper than just on the surface. When I reached the counter, I leaned against it, breathing heavily, heart still racing, in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling of those cold, thin fingers gripping my wrist. I was still staring at my hand when something shifted in the corner of my vision. My head snapped up, eyes darting towards the back of the store, and that's when I saw it again, the figure. Just like before. Standing between the aisles in the poorly lit section, its form still obscured by shadows. But I knew it was the same figure from earlier. That unsettling presence I'd seen, the one I'd tried to convince myself wasn't real. It was standing there, staring at me. Unmoving. This time, though, I felt the panic creeping up faster, hotter. Rule number 1. Always nod or wave to acknowledge its presence, and it will leave you alone. Was this really happening? Was this real? I swallowed hard, throat suddenly dry. I lifted my arm slowly, like it weighed a ton, and gave a small, hesitant wave towards the shadowy figure at the end of the aisle. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't shift in any way. But then its face, or what passed for a face, it lit up, with an unnerving, wide grin. The smile was impossibly wide, stretched from ear to ear, teeth gleaming unnaturally white in the dim light. It wasn't a smile of joy or warmth. It was too sharp, too predatory. It radiated a faint, unnatural glow, like the smile itself was made of something otherworldly. And then the figure vanished, just like that. Poof, gone. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind struggling to catch up with what I'd just seen. This wasn't my imagination. Something was happening. Something far worse than I could have ever imagined. Oh my God, I whispered, voice cracking. My heart was pounding harder than ever. I didn't know what to do. My legs felt weak, my mind racing. With trembling hands, I opened the drawer again. The faint creak of the wood made my heart jump. I fumbled inside, feeling for the familiar rough texture of the folded paper. The list of rules. I had to double-check it. Make sure I hadn't missed anything crucial. My mind was spinning after what had just happened, but I needed something concrete to hold on to. Even if it was just a set of bizarre, unsettling rules. As I unfolded the paper, the front door chimed. Chime-ding. I flinched, nerves still on edge, ready to jump at any sound. But it was just a customer. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap. He looked god normal. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. It's fine. Just another customer, normal customer, I thought, trying to force my heart rate back to something resembling normal. He nodded to me briefly and walked further into the store, heading towards the drinks aisle. I watched him for a second, then turned my attention back to the list, clinging to it like a lifeline. Okay, rules. Let's focus on the rules. Between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., count the customers. No more than 5. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Just past 1 a.m. So far, only this middle-aged guy had number 1. Customer 1 I had to keep track. No room for mistakes now. At 2:45 a.m. Clean aisle 3. I sighed. That seemed simple enough in theory. But after what had already happened tonight, nothing felt simple anymore. Still, the store wasn't huge. I could handle counting a few customers and cleaning 1 aisle. I repeated the steps to myself like a mantra, trying to find some comfort in the routine. Another customer walked in just as the middle-aged man finished checking out. He wished me a good night as he took his bag and left. I watched him walk through the automatic doors and disappear into the night. That's 2, I thought. Mentally added the new arrival to the count. Then, the woman who entered next, she didn't glance at me. Didn't say a word. Just walked straight ahead, her eyes locked in a distant, unblinking stare. Her movements were stiff, almost mechanical. Like she was being controlled by something. Her skin was pale, unnaturally smooth, and shimmered faintly under the store's fluorescent lights, like it wasn't skin at all. Like it was plastic. Or something else. Something artificial. I watched her as she disappeared into one of the aisles, breaking my line of sight. My breath caught in my throat. It took everything in me not to follow her, to see if she was real, or something else entirely. But I shook my head, forcing myself to stay behind the counter. It's nothing, I whispered to myself, trying to sound convincing. Just a weird customer. People are weird at night. I glanced at the clock again, just past 2 a.m., aisle 7. That was the next danger zone, according to the rules. I'd have to avoid it for the rest of the night. And honestly, that felt like the simplest thing in the world compared to what I'd already encountered. I checked the security monitor, peeking at the dim view of aisle 7. Everything seemed normal, for now. Around 2:30 a.m., the door chimed again. Ting! I turned to see another customer enter. A man, this time. Seemingly normal. He wandered through the aisles, picking up a few items. I breathed a small sigh of relief, grateful that he seemed ordinary. But something nagged at me. The third customer, the woman with the robotic movements, I hadn't seen her leave. My eyes flicked back to the monitor, switched through the different camera angles. Nothing. No sign of her anywhere in the store. Maybe she left and I just didn't notice, I thought, trying to convince myself. But the pit of unease in my stomach only grew deeper. 4 customers now. I mentally ticked them off, hoping and praying that no more would come before 4 a.m. The idea of encountering a 6th customer, I couldn't even bear to think about it. I watched the newest customer as he checked out with his goods, offering a polite good night as he walked out. 4. I reminded myself. The minutes ticked by, slowly, dragging like hours, and then my attention snapped to the clock. Almost 2:45 a.m. Time to clean aisle 3. Dread settled in my gut like a stone. I grabbed the mop and bucket from the back room, my hands shaking slightly. Slowly, I made my way to aisle 3. My footsteps echoed in the quiet store. The squeak of the wheels on the mop bucket sounded unnervingly loud in the silence. But just as I reached the aisle, I heard something. A whisper, faint and distant. I froze, gripping the handle of the mop. The sound seemed to drift through the air, faint but unmistakable. It was calling my name. I turned slowly, the whisper growing clearer, more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat hammering in my ears. The sound was coming from the other side of the store. Near aisle 7. My legs felt like lead as I started moving towards the sound. Each step reluctant, but something compelled me forward. The whisper grew louder the closer I got. My name. Over and over again, like a distant plea. I reached the edge of aisle 7. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew I shouldn't look, I knew it. But something took over. Some dark curiosity that made me peek around the corner, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. Aisle 7, it wasn't normal anymore. Mannequins. They stood scattered throughout the aisle, posed as if they were shopping. Their stiff limbs dressed in tattered clothing. Their plastic faces were blank, yet they radiated a silent menace that I couldn't explain. It was like they'd been caught mid-action, and the second I looked, they'd frozen in place. I pulled back, stumbling back, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. Took a shaky breath and peeked again, against every instinct screaming at me not to. This time, all the mannequins were looking directly at me. I staggered back again, my hands shaking, my pulse roaring in my ears. My body screamed at me to run, but my feet stayed planted to the spot, frozen in terror. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. And then, at the far end of the aisle, I spotted her, customer number 3. The woman with the robotic movements. She stood at the end of the aisle, staring directly at me, her face still blank. My heart dropped into my stomach. She was there. Suddenly she moved. No, she burst towards me, her body jerking unnaturally, her limbs flailing in that same mechanical rhythm. I let out a strangled cry and bolted, sprinting as fast as I could, away from aisle 7. I could hear the heavy thud of her footsteps growing louder, faster, pounding behind me. As the sound of footsteps reached the edge of the aisle, they stopped. I whipped around, ready to fight, ready to run again. But there was nothing, no sign of her, no sound, just empty aisles. I ran back to the counter, gasping for air, my hands flying to the security monitor. Fingers trembling, I flipped through the cameras. Aisle 7 appeared normal on the feed. No mannequins, no woman, just an empty, quiet aisle. And then, from somewhere deep in the store, I heard my name again. This time it wasn't a whisper, it was louder, clearer, and definitely not human. Alexa, it called, a voice like nails on a chalkboard, echoing through the empty store. Alex, I wasn't playing this game anymore. I glanced at the clock, past 2:45 a.m. Aisle 3, I needed to clean aisle 3. Now, I grabbed the mop and bucket, legs feeling weak beneath me, bolted towards aisle 3, dread pooling in my stomach like a stone. As I approached, my heart sank further. There it was, a pool of something on the floor. A thick, dark liquid, spread across the tiles, glistening under the store's fluorescent lights. Worse, I could see wet footprints leading away from the puddle. Small, childlike footprints, heading towards the far end of the aisle. I didn't have time to think. I just moved, rushed towards the spill, plunged the mop into the murky liquid, and furiously started scrubbing the floor. Hands shook as I worked, breath coming in ragged gasps. What is this? I thought, panic clawing at my mind. What is leaving these footprints? I mopped and scrubbed, heart pounding in my ears. The footprints led towards the end of the aisle, but as I got closer, they just stopped. Right around the corner. Vanished. As if whoever, or whatever, had left them had simply disappeared into thin air. I stared down at the now clean floor, my hands trembling around the handle of the mop. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Didn't know what was real. I had to get out of here. I left the mop and bucket behind, stumbling back to the counter, feeling completely drained. Physically and mentally exhausted. Terrified. My chest heaved as I leaned against the counter, gasping for breath. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something emerge from the darkness. I thought about Mark again. How exhausted and terrified he'd been when he warned me. He must have gone through all of this, experienced every one of these horrifying things to make that list of rules. A part of me wondered how he had even survived it. Another part of me wasn't sure he had. It was nearing 4 a.m. Almost done with Rule 3s, counting customers, or at least, I thought I was. Somewhere along the way, amidst all the strange events, I'd lost track. My mind had been all over the place, jumping from one unsettling moment to another. The panic of the night had scrambled my focus. I tried to piece it back together, but the harder I thought, the more I realized I wasn't sure how many customers had actually come in. Then, the entrance door chimed. Chimed ding. Its sharp sound jolted me out of my thoughts. My head snapped towards the door. And in walked a lone customer. He was bundled up in this thick winter coat, even though it wasn't even that coat out. Hood pulled low over his face, which was weird. Something about him just set me on edge immediately. The way he moved, slow, aimless, like he had no real purpose being in the store. He didn't look around, didn't acknowledge me, just wandered in, drifting between the aisles, never picking anything up. I watched him carefully, nerves taut, trying to figure out if this was the 5th customer or something else. The rule replayed in my mind. After the 5th customer, any others are not human. If a 6th enters, lock yourself in the back office. My heart pounded in my chest. Was this it? Was this the 6th customer? The night had become this blur of fear and confusion, and now I couldn't even remember what was real anymore. As I stared at the man, something odd caught my eye. His reflection. In the store's big front windows. It wasn't right. The image flickered, glitching in and out, like a broken video feed. The movements looked distorted, out of sync with his actual body. My stomach twisted with dread. Suddenly, the man stopped dead in his tracks. Standing perfectly still, slowly, he turned to face me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze, even through the shadows of the hood. 2 pale, ghostly eyes stared out from the darkness, locking onto me. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. And it felt like he was looking straight through me, straight into my soul, seeing something in me that no one should ever see. Panic hit me like a freight train. I bolted from behind the counter, legs moving on pure instinct. Didn't care what he was, didn't care about the rules anymore. I just knew I needed to get away. My heart thundered in my chest as I ran towards the back office, footsteps echoing through the empty store. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the customer far behind me. But he was much closer than he should have been. Gliding across the floor without moving his legs. Almost like a statue being dragged, his eyes still fixed on me, unblinking. I pushed myself harder, sprinting through the aisles until I reached the back office. Slammed the door shut, fumbled with the lock, and leaned against it, gasping for shallow breaths. Silence enveloped me, thick and suffocating. Just the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, a low-pitched hum began to vibrate through the walls. Soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, resonating from behind the door, like some kind of electrical charge building in the air. I gulped, pressing my ear to the door, trying to make sense of it. My body was frozen with fear, breath shallow and quiet, not daring to make a sound. The hum persisted for what felt like an eternity, filling the air with this ominous tension. And then it faded away. The silence returned, thick and oppressive, like the store itself was holding its breath. I stayed there, back pressed against the door, for what felt like hours. Too terrified to move, waiting for something to happen, but the only thing that greeted me was the eerie, suffocating stillness of the night. Eventually the fear began to dull, just a little. And curiosity, stupid curiosity, took over. I hadn't heard anything for a while. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling as I turned it. Cracked the door open, peeking out into the store. Everything seemed normal. The aisles were empty, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. No sign of the customer. No sign of anything out of the ordinary. But I knew better than to trust appearances now. Nothing felt right. I made my way back to the counter, the tension of the night still buzzing beneath my skin. But there was a slight sense of relief starting to creep in. I glanced at the monitor once more, scanning the empty aisles. The store was deserted, just as it should be. One more hour, one last stretch, and I'd be free of this nightmare for good. I kept watching the clock. The minutes ticking away agonizingly slowly. It was almost over. Just a little longer, and I'd be walking out of here, never to return to the night shift again. With each passing second, the weight on my shoulders lifted, just a tiny bit. It was almost 6:00 a.m. No customers had come in during the last few hours, or so I thought. The store had been quiet, unnaturally so. But I was grateful for it. The fewer customers, the fewer things that could go wrong. Then, just as I was starting to feel a flicker of hope, a soft knock echoed from the back door. Knock, knock. I froze, mind racing, glanced at the 50 a.m. 10 minutes until I could leave. I hesitated. The knock came again, firmer this time. Knock, knock. Reluctantly, I started walking towards the back door. Each step slow, cautious. Unlocked it and opened it carefully, just a crack. Standing there smiling was one of my colleagues from the day shift. Mike. Hey, Alex. He said casually, like nothing was wrong. How was the night? You look like you've seen a ghost. I just stared at him, feeling a pit of it growing in my stomach. Yeah. I muttered, voice hollow. You could say that. He proceeded towards the counter, all normal, all cheerful day, shift energy. As he stood there, behind the counter, where I'd been battling, whatever that was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The sense of impending doom weighed on me. Heavier than ever, my heart began to race again. I glanced around the dimly lit store, nerves on edge. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Just a quick flicker, then another. And then, without warning, everything went dark. The store was plunged into pitch blackness. and my breath caught in my throat. It was still dark outside, way too early for daylight. And now the store felt completely cut off from the world. My pulse quickened as I realized the power had gone out. I fumbled for the flashlight we kept in the back office, grabbed it, and flicked it on. A weak beam cut through the suffocating darkness. I bolted towards the counter to check on Mike. But when I got there, he was gone. "Mike," I called out, voice echoing in the sudden darkness. No answer. I scanned the aisles with the flashlight beam, but there was no sign of him. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran to the front door, flashlight cutting through the dark like a blade. But when I reached the front door, it wouldn't budge. Locked. Power outage must have jammed the automatic doors. I turned, shining the flashlight through the glass. The world outside wasn't just dark, it was void. An abyss. The light from my flashlight didn't penetrate it at all. It was as if the darkness was swallowing the light whole, consuming everything beyond the threshold of the store. I couldn't see anything. No buildings, no streetlights, nothing. The clock on the wall caught my eye, illuminated faintly by the flashlight beam. And my stomach dropped. It was 6:02 a.m. Mark told me to leave at 6 a.m. sharp. Not earlier, not later. 2 minutes late. I'd made a terrible mistake. Panic rising in my throat. I started running around the store, desperate, trying to figure out what exactly. Escape. Hide. I didn't even know anymore. All I knew was that I was trapped. In the dark. With something else. And the rules were all broken now.